Alright, welcome back to Mr. Berry's YouTube Notes Guides for Global Studies 2. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 13, The Great War, and today's notes section on this video is Section 1, Marching Toward War. Today we're going to talk about some of the events that kind of create the perfect storm leading up to World War I. And if you've never heard the term the Great War, just be aware that that was the name of World War I that was predominantly used before World War II. It would be kind of silly to call the war World War I when you didn't know if you were going to have a second one or not. So it was originally called the Great War. So if you hear the Great War, it means World War I. Okay. Let us begin. Setting the stage. What was the situation in Europe before World War I? Most everything we're going to talk about in today's lecture is looking at kind of the situation before and kind of running right up to World War I, what causes or creates the situation that enables World War I to occur. And we'll look at a few of those things here. Before 1900, most nations in Europe were at peace with each other. There is a period of time actually referred to as the 30 Years of Peace. And this was no accident. Efforts to outlaw war and achieve a permanent peace have been gaining momentum in Europe since about the middle of the 19th century, the mid-1800s or so. By 1900, hundreds of peace organizations were active in Europe. In addition, peace congresses had convened regularly between the 1840s and 1907. Some Europeans believed that progress had been made and war was going to be a thing of the past. Yet, in a little more than a decade, a massive war would engulf Europe and spread across the globe. Let's look at, then, a few of the things that made World War I possible, the whole occurrence of World War I possible. We're going to look at rising tensions in Europe and then go through a couple of things that made tensions rise. Now, while most of Europe had been characterized by peace and harmony in the years before 1900s, there were less visible and darker forces at work as well. Below the surface of peace and goodwill, Europe witnessed several gradual developments that would ultimately help propel the continents into war. The first of these is the rise of nationalism. One such development was the growth of nationalism, or a deep devotion to one's nation. That's what nationalism means. Okay. People began to feel great devotion to their nation or country. We do that in the United States. We do that in a lot of other countries today, where people are now self-identifying primarily as, Americans or French or British or Russian or what have you. They don't necessarily identify as their local province anymore, as was very common in the 18 and 1700s. They are identifying primarily as their national identity now. Nationalism can serve as a unifying force within a country. However, it can also cause intense competition amongst nations, with each seeking to overpower the other. And by the turn of the 20th century, a fierce rivalry had developed amongst Europe's great powers, including France, Great Britain, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Italy, and Russia. This increasing rivalry among European nations stemmed from several sources. Competition was primarily for things like material resources, raw materials, markets as well. Territorial disputes were another issue that occurred in Europe a lot. France, for example, had never gotten over the loss of Alsace-Lorraine to Germany in the Franco-Prussian War, which ended in 1870. Austria-Hungary and Russia both tried to dominate in the Balkan region, which you can see here in blue. It is a region in southeast Europe. Within the Balkans, there's an intense nationalism of Serbs, Bulgarians, Romanians, and other ethnic groups, which leads to a lot of demands for independence. So basically Russia and Austria-Hungary are fighting over the Balkans, but the Balkans just really want to be left alone. We will return to both of these places, Alsace-Lorraine and the Balkans, in a little while. Another force that helped set the stage for war in Europe was imperialism. We just finished a chapter on that, and you can see those notes guides on here as well, on YouTube. And as chapter 11 explained, the nations of Europe competed fiercely for colonies in Africa and Asia and other portions of the world. The quest for colonies sometimes pushed European nations to the brink of war, or if you recall in the Boer War, actually has them fight. You recall in the Boer War, Britain and the Dutch actually fight over South Africa. So not only does it push a lot of them to the brink of war, it actually pushes some of them to war. As European countries continued to compete for overseas empires, their sense of rivalry and mistrust for one another deepened. Another source of rising tensions in Europe was developing throughout the early years of the 20th century, and that was the rise of a dangerous European arms race, or militarism. These nations of Europe believed that to be truly great, they needed to have a powerful military. By 1914, all the great powers except Britain had large standing armies, and they would eventually catch up as well, as we can see in the photo to the right, which is actually Britain's troops on the way to the Battle of Gallipoli during World War I. In addition, military experts stressed the importance of being able to quickly mobilize or organize and move troops in case of war. Generals in each country developed highly detailed plans for such mobilization, some of which we'll talk about in Part 2. The policy of glorifying military power, by the way, is one of your vocab words, and keeping an army prepared for war was known as militarism, and that is your vocab word. Having a large and strong standing army made citizens feel patriotic. However, it also frightened some people. As early as 1895, you have people like Frederick Passé, a prominent peace activist, expressing concern that many shared. He says, "The entire able-bodied population are preparing to massacre one another, though no one, it is true, wants to attack, and everybody protests his love and peace and determination to maintain it. Yet the whole world feels that it only requires some unforeseen incident, some unpreventable accident, for the spark to fall in a flash and blow all of Europe sky high." So, some people saw where this might go, and it wasn't going anywhere good. To the point of militarism, there is a lot of drive in Europe before and during World War I to create very large armies. So you see a lot of propaganda posters and so on in Europe during this time. These two here are from Britain and Germany specifically. The one on the left is from England, of course. "Surely you will fight for your king," that's actually George V there, "and your land. Come along, boys, before it's too late." And I'm going to butcher the German on this one on the right, but it is "Helft uns siegen," which basically means "help us win." It was intended to get people to join the army during the war. So there is a very strong sense of militarism in a lot of European countries during this period. Tangled alliances. Alliances, as you may be familiar, if you're at all familiar with world history, alliances are generally formed to keep peace. The time coming up to World War I is not really different. The idea being that if one nation were attacked, another would defend it so that nobody would want to fight, okay? If, for example, you know a kid on the bus stop named Bobby, and you don't like Bobby for some reason, and you just really want to beat him up, but you know that Bobby's older brother is the linebacker on varsity football team, and then if you touch Bobby, he's going to cream you into the ground, you're probably not going to mess with Bobby. Well, this theory works out on country levels as well, so that if you know, say, for example, a country you want to attack happens to have a very powerful ally, you probably won't attack them in fear that you might have to fight both of them. The problem with alliances is that it actually is going to be the one major force, if we can say nothing else caused World War I, is going to be the one major thing that pushes the continent and indeed the world into war. This tangled web of alliances is going to be what really causes it. It won't be the spark. However, in the end game, alliances are what are going to actually cause the World War I to come about. Now, where do these alliances come from? Well, obviously somebody has to create these alliances. And one of the main players in creating these alliances was going to be this gentleman on the right, Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, who had unified Germany between the years of 1864 and 1871. After 1871, however, Bismarck declared Germany to be a, quote, satisfied power. He then turned his energy to maintaining peace in Europe. Bismarck saw France as the greatest threat to peace in Europe. He believed that France still wanted revenge against Germany for its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. Bismarck's first goal, therefore, was to isolate France. As long as it is without allies, Bismarck stressed, France poses no danger to us, he said. And in 1879, Bismarck forms first this thing called the Dual Alliance between Germany and Austria-Hungary, and then 3 years later, in 1881, he actually forms a alliance with Italy. These two countries form the Triple Alliance. Or excuse me, that happened in 1879. In 1881, he also forms an alliance with Russia. Triple Alliance, by the way, is one of your vocab words. A military alliance between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy in the years preceding World War I. All of these countries were possible allies for France that Germany is now taking away from them. Now, the alliances are going to start shifting, and this will threaten peace in Europe. In 1890, Germany's foreign policy changes dramatically. That year, Kaiser Wilhelm II, who 2 years earlier had become the ruler of Germany, forces Bismarck to resign. A proud and stubborn man, Wilhelm II did not wish to share his power with anyone, especially Bismarck, someone who was such a powerful and forceful leader. Besides wanting to assert his own power, the new Kaiser, which is German for emperor or king, was eager to show the world just how mighty Germany had become. Especially proud was he of the army. The army was his greatest pride. Quote, he says, "I and the army were born for one another," Wilhelm declared. Shortly after taking power, he says this. Wilhelm had let his nation's treaty with Russia lapse in 1890, which was probably one of his first bad mistakes. Russia responded to this. Here's why it's a mistake. They responded to this by forming a defensive military alliance with France in 1892 and in 1894. Such an alliance had been Bismarck's greatest fear, because war with either Russia or France now would make Germany the enemy of both. Germany would then be forced to fight a two-front war, or, in other words, a war on both its eastern and western borders. If you look at a map of Europe during this period, they are directly on either side of Germany, and they could therefore be stuck in what is called a pincer attack between the two. They could be crushed between Russia and France. Kaiser Wilhelm II, by the way, is one of your vocab terms. He is defined as the German emperor from 1888 to 1918 that led the German people into World War I. He was, as a result, and I hope this is not a spoiler for anyone, the last German emperor because Germany lost the war. It will, of course, take us 3 more sections of notes to get to the point where they actually do lose. But be aware that this does not work out for the Germans. Here's a little foreshadowing for you. Now, Wilhelm, I should mention, also began a tremendous shipbuilding program. He was building up the navy of Germany, and he wanted to make it the equal of that of the mighty British fleet. We know, of course, in this period of time that the British have an unparalleled navy, and Germany wants to start to compete with them about ships and navy power. He wants to get a power that if he ever does have to fight Britain, will at least be capable of fighting them. Now, alarmed by this, Britain forms an alliance with France and Russia in 1907. Entente, by the way, is the French for alliance, so don't get the two alliance systems that we have here, Triple Alliance and Triple Entente, mixed up. They do basically mean the same thing, but we're using a different word so that they are intelligible from each other. So in Europe you now have two rival camps. You have the Triple Alliance, which is Germany, Hungary, Austria, Hungary, and Italy, versus the Triple Entente, which is the United Kingdom or Great Britain, France, and Russia. A fight between any two of these members could draw everyone else in, so this was initially a very strong deterrent to war. Triple Entente, by the way, one of your vocab words down there on the right side, here shown in the poster, is a military alliance between Great Britain, France, and Russia in the years before World War I. Alright, let us talk about crisis in the Balkans, a restless region. The Balkan Peninsula is a problem area for Europe and has been for a long time. It has an incredibly long history of nationalist uprisings and ethnic clashes. It is for this reason that the region has been nicknamed the, quote, powder keg, unquote, of Europe. It is, in other words, potentially an explosive area. And if you know anything about powder kegs, you know anything about black powder, it really doesn't take much to set them off. You just apply a sufficient amount of heat on any part of it, and the whole thing blows. Okay? And the Balkan Peninsula is very similar to that in the sense that it is very volatile. Now, by the early 1900s, the Ottoman Empire, which included the Balkan region, was in rapid decline. Remember, we called it the sick man of Europe in Chapter 11. And that continues to be the case here. Now, while some Balkan groups struggled to free themselves from the Ottoman Turks, others already had succeeded in breaking away from the Turkish rulers. These people had formed new nations, including Bulgaria, Greece, Montenegro, Romania, and Serbia. Serbia is where we are going to focus. Nationalism, by the way, was a very powerful force in these countries, especially in Serbia. Each group longed to extend its borders, and Serbia, for example, which has a large Slavic population, hoped to absorb all the other Slavs on the Balkan Peninsula. Russia, one of its allies, itself was a mostly Slavic nation, and it supported Serbian nationalism. However, Serbia's powerful northern neighbor, Austria-Hungary, opposed such an effort. The reason it opposed this is because Austria feared that the efforts to create a Slavic state would stir rebellion amongst its Slavic population. However, as we're about to see, Austria-Hungary doesn't make this any easier for themselves. Austria-Hungary versus Serbia is going to become a pretty powerful rivalry. In 1908, Austria annexed, or formally took over, Bosnia and Herzegovina. These were two Balkan areas with large Slavic populations. Serbian leaders who had sought to rule these provinces were outraged by Austria-Hungary taking these areas. They had wanted to take them themselves, and so years following this, tensions between Serbia and Austria steadily rose. The Serbs continually vowed to take Bosnia and Herzegovina away from Austria. However, in response, Austria-Hungary vowed to crush beneath its boot heel any Serbian effort to undermine its authority in the Balkans. So you can tell this relationship is going really well. And as badly as it is going, it's about to get worse. Shots ring through Europe. Into this poisoned atmosphere of mutual dislike and mistrust stepped the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and his wife, Sophie. On June 28, 1914, the couple had paid a state visit to Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. It would be their last visit there. The royal pair was shot at point-blank range as they rode through the streets of Sarajevo in an open limousine. The killer was a man named Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old Serbian member of a terrorist group called the Black Hand. And I'm going to insert a video here so you can kind of see what the situation was like for this assassination.
On June the 28th, 1914, a murder took place here in Sarajevo, Bosnia, that ignited a world war. This is how it happened. The heir to the mighty Austrian Empire, Franz Ferdinand, is visiting Sarajevo, the capital of one of his empire's most restless provinces. Many Bosnians wish to be part of next-door Serbia. Days earlier, the Archduke says, "I wouldn't be surprised if there are a few Serbian bullets waiting for me." He arrives with his wife Sophie on the morning of June the 28th, 1914. It's their wedding anniversary. They've loved their trip so far. It's also an anniversary for the Serbs. Vidovdan, the date of the 1389 Battle of Kosovo against the Ottoman Turks, where the Serbians were heroically crushed. It has always been a day on which the Serbs renewed their ambition to throw off the yoke of a foreign overlord. The couple arrive here at the train station where they conduct a troop inspection. At 10 o'clock they set off in a convoy of vehicles. Theirs is a luxury open limousine. They drive south, then east. Their destination is here, the town hall where a lavish reception is waiting. Little did the royal couple know, but they were about to run a lethal gauntlet. Along the route are assassins, young men committed to freeing Bosnia from Austrian rule and uniting with Serbia. They are armed with weapons supplied by rogue members of the Serbian government. The first assassin is standing here, armed with a pistol, but as the convoy drives past, he freezes and does nothing. At 10:10, the convoy reaches Nadielko Kobrinovic. At that bridge there, Kobrinovic was waiting, a young man dying of tuberculosis, desperate to complete this mission before his death. He threw a bomb as the Archduke's car passed at 20 yards range. It bounced off the back of the car and rolled underneath the car behind, blowing up and injuring around 20 people. The Archduke's driver accelerated away down here past the necks of the assassins. This assassin, Gavrilo Princip, does nothing, perhaps assuming that the bomb has done its job. Franz Ferdinand is shaken, but attends the reception at the town hall. The speech he reads out is covered in the blood of his assistant, injured in the crash. They decide to visit their wounded colleagues and the bystanders in the Sarajevo hospital. At 10:45, the royal group leave the town hall. They drive along the same road on which they've survived one assassination attempt already today. Meanwhile, Princip, having failed in his assassination attempt, is standing around on this street corner. Nobody has informed the Archduke's driver about the change of plan, so at the very same junction, the driver slows down and turns right. The Archduke's car rolled in, turned right, and stopped right here, as the driver was told they actually wanted to go that way. The driver stalled the car. Princip took his pistol out of his pocket and fired 2 shots at 1.5 meter range. The first hit Sophie in the abdomen. The second shot grazed the jugular of the Archduke. They were mortally wounded. They were the first 2 shots fired in what would become the First World War, a war that would see well over 10 million people killed, fired on this street corner in Sarajevo.
So that should give you some idea kind of how that assassination went down. It's actually sort of a fascinating story. Apparently, Gavrilo was sitting on that street corner because he was eating a sandwich or drinking coffee at a cafe, mourning the fact that he had not gotten the job done. So, go figure. Again, one of those perfect storm situations that helps create or begin World War I. Princip, obviously, we've seen, is a Serbian, and he was also a member of the Black Hand, a terrorist group, essentially, which was a secret society committing to keeping Austrians, or getting Austrians, out of Bosnia. Because he was a Serbian, the assassin, Gavrilos Princip was a Serbian, Hungary used the murder as an excuse to punish Serbia. They looked at it kind of as a declaration of war from Serbia, although it was not any way, shape, or form that. On July 23rd, Austria presented Serbia with an ultimatum containing numerous demands. Serbia knew, of course, that refusing the ultimatum would lead to war against the more powerful Austria, something I assure you it did not want to do. Therefore, Serbian leaders actually agreed to most of Austria's demands, but they offered on some of them to have several others settled or deliberated upon by an international conference. Austria, however, was in no mood to negotiate, and the nation's leaders, it seemed, had already settled on war. On July 28th, Austria rejects Serbia's offer and just decides to declare war. That same day, Russia, who was an ally of Serbia, had formed an alliance with them, especially because of their also very large Slavic population, also took action. Russian leaders ordered, actually, the mobilization of troops toward the Austrian border. Leaders all over Europe suddenly take notice of this, and the fragile European stability is now ready to collapse into armed conflict. The British foreign minister, the Italian government, and even Kaiser Wilhelm II himself urged Austria and Russia to negotiate. Unfortunately, by this point it was too late. The machinery of war had been set in motion, and many other nations would follow into this conflict. Thank you for listening to Section 1. I will see you guys soon with Section 2. And it'll be spring break soon, so that's nice as well. Thanks, guys. Bye.